They say the wealthiest man in England chose his bride with the precision of a military campaign. They say she accepted without hesitation, as if she had nothing to lose. They say it was the most austere wedding London had ever witnessed. No tears, no vows of love, only signatures on parchment. What they didn't know was that Lady Margaret Ashford walked down that aisle with a dagger strapped beneath her petticoats and orders from the Queen herself folded against her heart. What they couldn't have known was that the Duke of Ashbourne had been counting on exactly that. This is not a story about a spy who fell in love with her target. This is a story about a woman who discovered she was never the hunter at all, only bait in a trap she didn't see closing until it was too late. If you want to witness how power, deception, and loyalty collide in Regency England, stay with me. Subscribe and tell me in the comments, would you accept a marriage offer if you knew you were being used? Margaret Ashford had learned long ago that invitations from the Queen were never requests. The sealed envelope arrived at dawn, carried by a palace courier, whose white gloves bore not a single wrinkle. He placed it directly into her hands, bowed without meeting her eyes, and departed before the morning fog had lifted from the cobblestones. She broke the wax seal in her study, the crimson crown fracturing beneath her thumb. "Lady Ashford, your presence is required at Kensington Palace this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Come alone. Speak to no one of this summons. Cham." Margaret set the letter down and pressed her fingertips against the desk edge. The wood was solid beneath her touch, grounding her even as her mind calculated a dozen possibilities. She had been in service to the Crown for nearly 8 years. Long enough to know that private audiences meant danger, long enough to understand that whatever the Queen wanted, Margaret would have no choice but to deliver. Kensington Palace at 3 o'clock gleamed with wealth. Margaret moved through corridors lined with gilded frames and marble busts, her footsteps muffled by Persian carpets. A young lady in waiting led her through antechambers until they reached a door of polished mahogany. The woman knocked twice, then opened without waiting. "Lady Ashford, Your Majesty." Margaret stepped inside. The Queen sat behind a writing desk near the window, late afternoon light casting her profile in sharp relief. She didn't look up immediately. Instead, she finished writing, the scratch of quill on parchment the only sound in the room. Margaret waited. She had learned patience in this service, how to stand without fidgeting, how to breathe without sound, how to present herself as a blank canvas upon which orders could be written. Finally, the Queen set down her quill. "Lady Ashford, thank you for your promptness." "Your Majesty." Margaret curtsied, lowering her gaze just long enough to convey deference without submission. The Queen gestured toward a chair upholstered in emerald velvet. "Sit." Margaret obeyed, spine straight, hands folded, the posture of a lady, the stillness of a predator. The Queen studied her, dark eyes assessing. She was a woman who had survived decades of political intrigue, who had outlasted rivals through ruthlessness and strategic brilliance. Margaret respected her, feared her, perhaps, but respect and fear were often indistinguishable in this line of work. "I have a task for you," the Queen said, "one that will require all of your particular talents." Margaret inclined her head. "I am at Your Majesty's service." "The Duke of Ashbourne." Margaret felt something sharp settle in her chest at the name. Everyone in England knew of the Duke of Ashbourne. Russell Blackwood, the wealthiest peer in the kingdom, owner of estates across 3 counties, patron of industries that fueled half of London's economy. A man who moved through society with detached elegance, understanding exactly how much power he wielded. And more importantly, a man whose political loyalties had recently become ambiguous. "What about him, Your Majesty?" The Queen rose and moved to the window. "He has been making inquiries, asking questions about Crown expenditures, about certain financial arrangements that are better left unexamined." Margaret's pulse remained steady, but her mind sharpened. "Corruption. He's sniffing around corruption. His Grace is positioning himself," the Queen continued, her tone flat. "Building alliances among reform-minded lords. Gathering evidence, though he's been careful not to show his hand. You want me to determine his intentions. I want you to stop him." The Queen turned, and her expression could have cut glass. "Russell Blackwood is dangerous precisely because he believes himself righteous. Men with principles are far more destructive than men with ambition." Margaret absorbed this. "How would you have me proceed?" The Queen returned to her desk, retrieving a folded document bound with black ribbon. She held it out. "The Duke requires a wife. His political ambitions demand it. A man of his stature cannot continue indefinitely as a bachelor without inviting speculation." Margaret looked down at the document, but didn't open it. "He will propose a contract marriage," the Queen continued. Purely transactional, a union of convenience that will satisfy society's expectations while leaving both parties free to pursue their own interests. You will accept. You want me to marry him. I want you to become his wife, gain his trust and report every whisper of sedition that crosses his lips. The Queen's voice turned to steel. You will learn who his allies are, what evidence he possesses, and precisely how much damage he could do if left unchecked. And when the time comes, you will ensure that he understands the cost of opposing the crown. Margaret kept her expression neutral, but calculations spun beneath her calm exterior. Marriage. Full infiltration. Months, perhaps years, of living a double life under the same roof as a man known for his intelligence and strategic acumen. It was the most dangerous assignment she had ever received. Does His Grace know I am being encouraged to accept his proposal? The Queen's smile was thin. Russell Blackwood believes himself a master of strategy. Let him continue to believe so. He will see what he expects. A respectable widow of good family who needs financial security and social position. He will not suspect that his bride comes with a far different purpose. Margaret nodded slowly, though doubt flickered at the edges of her thoughts. The Duke of Ashbourne had not amassed his fortune through carelessness. Men like him survived by anticipating threats. But orders were orders. I understand, Your Majesty. Good. The Queen returned to her seat, picking up her quill. He will approach you within the week. You will accept with appropriate hesitation, enough to seem realistic, not enough to dissuade him. And Margaret. Yes, Your Majesty. The Queen's eyes lifted, and Margaret saw something ancient and implacable in that gaze. Do not fail me. The consequences would be unfortunate. It was dismissal and threat woven into one. Margaret curtsied deeply, then walked toward the door. Her footsteps were steady, her breathing measured, her expression carefully blank. But as she stepped into the corridor and the door closed with a soft click, she allowed herself one moment, just one, to feel the weight of what had been placed on her shoulders. She was to become the Duchess of Ashbourne. She was to deceive one of the most dangerous men in England, and she was to do it all while pretending she had chosen this freely. As Margaret stepped into the late afternoon air, drawing her cloak around her shoulders against the autumn chill, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in London, Russell Blackwood was sitting in his study, looking at a list of names and smiling. The proposal came exactly 5 days later. Margaret was in her drawing room, reviewing correspondence, when her butler appeared with a silver tray bearing a single card. The Duke of Ashbourne requests the honour of calling upon Lady Ashford this afternoon at 4 o'clock, should it be convenient. Margaret looked at the card for a long moment, then set it down beside her teacup. Send word that I will receive His Grace. The butler bowed and withdrew. Margaret rose and moved to the mirror above the mantelpiece, studying her reflection with clinical detachment. She was 30 years old, with dark hair pinned simply, and grey eyes that revealed nothing. Not striking in the way that turned heads at a ballroom, perhaps, but composed, elegant in stillness rather than spectacle, the kind of woman who could sit through a 7-course dinner without betraying a single thought, perfect for a contract marriage, perfect for espionage. She adjusted the lace at her collar, smoothed her afternoon dress, and returned to her seat. Then she picked up a book, a volume of poetry she had no intention of reading, and waited. At precisely 4 o'clock, the butler announced him. His Grace, the Duke of Ashbourne. Margaret set down her book and rose as Russell Blackwood entered her drawing room. He was taller than she'd expected, dressed in a charcoal coat that fit with the precision of wealth and excellent tailoring. His hair was dark, touched with grey at the temples, and his face carried austere handsomeness, good bone structure, and absolute self-command. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. A piercing blue, sharp and assessing, impossible to read and far too perceptive to ignore. He bowed. Lady Ashford, thank you for receiving me on such short notice. Your Grace. She curtsied, then gestured toward the chair opposite hers. Please, sit. He did, settling with an economy of movement that suggested military training. He didn't fidget, didn't adjust his cuffs or clear his throat. He simply sat, looked at her directly, and waited. It was a power play, Margaret realized. He was letting silence stretch between them, testing whether she would fill it with nervous chatter. She did not. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap and met his gaze with equal calm, allowing the silence to become a conversation of its own. Finally, after what felt like a small eternity, the Duke spoke. I will not waste your time with pleasantries, Lady Ashford. I am in need of a wife. and I believe you may be in need of a husband. I propose we discuss terms." Margaret felt something precise settle into place behind her ribs. "So it begins. I am listening, Your Grace." Russell Blackwood didn't move. He sat across from her with the stillness of a man accustomed to negotiating treaties, his hands resting loosely on the chair arms. "I require a wife for political reasons," he said, his voice low and measured. "Society demands it. My peers expect it, and I have neither the time nor the inclination for the theatrics of courtship." Margaret inclined her head slightly, acknowledging without commenting. "In return," he continued, "you would receive financial security, social position, and complete freedom to manage your own affairs. I do not require immediate heirs. The matter of succession is already legally secured through my collateral line. I do not require affection. I require only that you fulfill the public duties of a duchess and maintain the appearance of a respectable marriage." It was the most transactional proposal Margaret had ever heard, delivered with the emotional weight of a business contract, which she supposed was exactly what it was. "And what would you require of me specifically, Your Grace?" Presence at social functions where necessary, management of household staff and estates, correspondence with other ladies of rank to maintain our social position. He paused, his pale eyes studying her face with unsettling intensity. "Discretion, above all else. What occurs within the bounds of our marriage remains private." Margaret turned each phrase over in her mind, searching for hidden meanings. The Queen had been right. Russell Blackwood was offering exactly the arrangement that would appeal to a widow seeking security without romantic entanglement. "You are aware, Your Grace, that I bring no dowry to such a union. My late husband left me comfortable, but hardly wealthy. I am not seeking wealth, Lady Ashford. I have sufficient resources." Something flickered in his expression, not quite amusement. "What I seek is a woman of intelligence and composure who understands the value of discretion and will not mistake a legal arrangement for a love match." The words hung in the air between them, precise and final. Margaret set her teacup down with deliberate care, buying herself a moment to calculate her response. She needed to appear interested, but cautious, practical, but not desperate. "You speak of discretion, Your Grace. May I assume that means you would pursue your own interests without interference? I would extend you the same courtesy." It was an admission without being explicit. He was telling her their marriage would be one in name only, that neither would intrude upon the other's private life. For a spy it was nearly perfect. Freedom to move, to investigate, to report back to the Queen without a husband demanding explanations. Too perfect, perhaps. Margaret pushed the thought away. Paranoia had no place in this conversation. "I would require certain assurances," she said carefully. "Legal protections to ensure I retain control of my personal property and inheritance. Naturally, my solicitor will draw up a contract specifying all terms. You may have your own legal counsel review it before signing. And the living arrangements? Ashbourne Manor will be your primary residence. I maintain apartments in London for business. You would be free to travel between residences as you see fit, provided you inform the household staff of your movements." Margaret nodded slowly, as if considering. In truth, she was memorizing every detail, storing it away for later analysis. "This is quite sudden, Your Grace. Forgive me for asking, but why approach me? Surely there are younger women of higher rank who would accept such an offer." For the first time, something like genuine expression crossed Russell Blackwood's face. Not warmth exactly, but assessment. Younger women would expect romance. Higher-ranking women would demand influence over my political affairs. You, Lady Ashford, are a widow who has proven herself capable of managing a household independently. You understand the realities of marriage among our class, and you have a reputation for intelligence and discretion. He leaned forward slightly, and Margaret caught the faint scent of sandalwood and parchment, the smell of libraries and careful planning. You will not weep when I spend weeks at my estates without sending word. You will not demand declarations of affection or manufacture scandals to gain my attention. You will be precisely what I require, a duchess in public and a stranger in private. The words should have been insulting. Instead, they were simply honest. Margaret found herself respecting him for that, even as she reminded herself that respect was dangerous. "I see. Do you?" Russell's eyes narrowed fractionally. "I am offering you security and position in exchange for performance of a role. Nothing more, nothing less. If that arrangement suits you, I will have the contracts prepared within 3 days. If it does not, I will thank you for your time and seek another candidate." An ultimatum disguised as courtesy. Accept now or lose the opportunity. The Queen's voice echoed in Margaret's memory. He will approach you within the week. You will accept with appropriate hesitation, enough to seem realistic, not enough to dissuade him. Margaret rose from her chair, forcing Russell to stand as well. She moved to the window, looking out at the street below where carriages rolled past and servants hurried on errands. From this angle she could see his reflection in the glass, standing perfectly still, watching her. "I will accept your proposal, Your Grace," she said quietly, "on the condition that the contract protects my independence and property rights, and that we maintain absolute discretion regarding the nature of our arrangement." "Agreed." She turned to face him directly. "When would you wish the ceremony to take place?" 6 weeks. That will allow sufficient time for contracts, arrangements, and a small ceremony that satisfies propriety without inviting excessive attention. 6 weeks to prepare. 6 weeks to establish her cover completely. 6 weeks to report back to the Queen and receive final instructions. That is acceptable. Russell crossed the room with 3 long strides and extended his hand. Not to kiss, as tradition might dictate, but to shake, as if they were gentlemen concluding a business transaction. Margaret took his hand. His grip was firm and lasted exactly 3 seconds before he released her. "I will send the contracts to your solicitor by Friday," he said. "Once you have reviewed them, we will proceed with arrangements." "Very well, Your Grace." He bowed, precise and formal. "Lady Ashford." Then he turned and walked toward the door. The butler appeared to escort him out, and within moments, Margaret heard the front door close with a soft click. She remained at the window, watching as Russell Blackwood descended her front steps and climbed into his carriage. The vehicle pulled away smoothly, disappearing into London traffic. Only when it was completely out of sight did Margaret allow herself to exhale. She had done it, accepted the proposal exactly as the Queen had ordered. The first step was complete. So why did she feel as though she had just agreed to something far more dangerous than a simple marriage of convenience? The contracts arrived precisely as promised, delivered by a stern-faced solicitor who spread them across her drawing-room table and walked her through each clause with meticulous attention. Margaret read every word, her mind cataloguing not just the legal terms but the gaps between them, the things left unsaid, the loopholes that could be exploited, the subtle distribution of power. Russell Blackwood had been extraordinarily generous. She would retain full control of her personal property. She would receive a substantial annual allowance with no requirement to account for expenditures. She would have authority over household staff and estates, answerable only to him in major financial decisions, and most tellingly, she would have her own private chambers, with locks to which only she held the keys. It was the contract of a man who truly wanted a duchess in name only, a man who valued privacy above all else, or a man who wanted her to feel secure and independent while he observed from a distance. Margaret signed her name with a steady hand, watching the ink dry on the parchment that would bind her to the Duke of Ashbourne. 6 weeks, 6 weeks, and then the real work begins. She sent her first report to the Queen that evening, written in cipher and delivered through the usual channels. Contract accepted. Marriage scheduled 6 weeks hence. Initial assessment. Subject is cautious and extraordinarily careful with information. No obvious vulnerabilities detected. Will establish position and begin intelligence gathering after ceremony. M.A. The response came the following morning, brief and pointed. Acceptable. Do not underestimate him. Report weekly. H.M. Margaret memorized the cipher confirmation required by protocol, then burned both messages in her fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. Then she began preparing for her new life as the Duchess of Ashbourne. The wedding took place on a grey morning in late October, in a small chapel on the grounds of Ashbourne Manor. Margaret arrived the day before, her belongings already transported by hired coaches, her London household staff left with instructions to close up the townhouse. Ashbourne Manor was precisely as she'd expected, vast, imposing and beautiful in the way that centuries of wealth could create. Stone walls covered in ivy, gardens stretching beyond sight, windows catching the light like shields. She was shown to her chambers by the housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, who had the efficient manner of someone who'd managed great estates for decades. "His Grace instructed me to ensure you have everything you require, my lady," Mrs. Pemberton said, gesturing around the suite of rooms. "If anything is not to your satisfaction, you have only to speak." Margaret examined the space carefully. A bedroom with a 4-poster bed, draped in midnight blue velvet. A sitting room with a writing desk near the window. A dressing room large enough to serve as a small library. And everywhere, the subtle marks of wealth: Persian carpets, oil paintings in gilded frames, furniture crafted from woods she couldn't even name. "It is lovely," Margaret said, and meant it. "Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton." The housekeeper nodded, pleased. "His Grace's chambers are in the East Wing. He asked me to inform you that he does not expect to disturb you, and that you should feel entirely at liberty to arrange your rooms as you see fit. Separate wings, maximum distance, maximum privacy." "That is very considerate." Mrs. Pemberton hesitated, then spoke with careful neutrality. "His Grace is a good master, my lady. Fair and just. I hope you will be happy here." It was as close to a warning, or perhaps a reassurance, as the woman would come. "I'm sure I shall be," Margaret replied. The ceremony itself lasted less than 20 minutes. Margaret wore a dress of pale grey silk, elegant but not celebratory. Russell wore black, as he seemed to always, with a white cravat, his only concession to formality. There were no guests, no flowers, no music, just a priest who spoke the words with practiced efficiency, and 2 servants pulled from the household to serve as witnesses. "Do you, Margaret Elizabeth Ashford, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Do you, Russell James Blackwood, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." The priest pronounced them married. Russell lifted her hand and kissed it once, formally, his lips barely brushing her gloved knuckles. They signed the register. The witnesses signed below them. And just like that, Margaret became the Duchess of Ashbourne. There was no wedding breakfast, no celebration. Russell had business to attend to in his study, and Margaret was free to settle into her new rooms. She spent the afternoon unpacking with the help of a lady's maid assigned to her. The girl was young, efficient, and spoke only when spoken to, precisely the kind of servant useful for maintaining cover. As evening fell, Margaret stood at her window and looked out over the grounds of Ashbourne Manor, watching as lamps were lit throughout the estate, small points of light appearing in the gathering darkness. Somewhere in the East Wing, her husband, her target, was doing the same. A knock sounded at her door. "Enter," Margaret called. Mrs. Pemberton appeared, carrying a sealed envelope on a silver tray. "From His Grace, my lady. He asked that I deliver this to you personally." Margaret took the envelope, noting the weight of the paper, the precision of the seal. "Thank you." The housekeeper withdrew, and Margaret broke the seal with her thumb. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in Russell's precise hand. "Welcome to Ashbourne, Your Grace. I trust you will find everything satisfactory. If you require anything at all, you have only to ask. I should inform you as a courtesy that I am aware you are in service to the Crown. I married you because of it, not in spite of it. We should speak tomorrow. There is much to discuss." Our Margaret's hands didn't shake. Her breathing didn't change. Her expression remained perfectly calm. But inside, behind the careful walls she had built around herself, something sharp pierced through. He knows. He has always known. And she had walked directly into his trap. Margaret did not sleep that night. She sat in the chair by the window of her new chambers, the letter resting on the small table beside her, watching as the moon traced its path across the sky. The estate was silent except for distant wind moving through the trees and the occasional creak of old wood settling. Her mind worked through possibilities with mechanical precision. He knows. He has always known. She considered running, dismissed it immediately. There was nowhere to run that would protect her from either the Queen's wrath or the Duke's reach. She considered denial, also dismissed. The letter's tone suggested he possessed proof, not suspicion. She considered violence. A knife in the dark, a tragic accident, a widow twice over returning to London with a fortune and her secrets intact. But she was not an assassin, she was a spy. And killing the Duke of Ashbourne would accomplish nothing except ensuring her own destruction. No, there was only one path forward: discover what he wanted, why he had orchestrated this marriage, and how much danger she was truly in. At dawn, she rose and dressed with meticulous care. She chose a morning gown of deep burgundy, high-necked and severe. She pinned her hair without a single strand out of place. Then she walked through the silent corridors to the East Wing, found her husband's study and knocked once. "Enter." Russell Blackwood sat behind a desk of dark mahogany, papers spread before him in organized stacks, a cup of coffee cooling at his elbow. He wore no jacket, only shirt sleeves and a waistcoat, and the morning light cast his face in shadow. He didn't look surprised to see her. Of course he didn't. Margaret closed the door behind her and remained standing. "Your letter was illuminating, Your Grace." I thought it best to be direct. He set down his pen. You were going to discover the truth eventually. How long have you known? Since before I proposed. And you married me anyway. I married you because of it. Russell rose and moved to the window. Tell me, what did the Queen tell you about me? Margaret remained silent, weighing her options. Russell glanced at her over his shoulder. She told you I was dangerous, that I was investigating Crown expenditures, that I needed to be stopped. Each word was precisely what the Queen had said. Margaret felt ice settle in her chest. How? Because it's true. Russell turned to face her. All of it. I am investigating Crown corruption, and I am dangerous to those who profit from it. He paused. Your Queen included. Margaret's mind raced through layers of deception. You wanted her to send a spy. I wanted her to send you. He crossed back to his desk and retrieved a portfolio. Margaret Elizabeth Ashford, recruited 6 years ago, 12 successful assignments, the Queen's best operative. He looked up, expression sharp. When I made it clear I needed a wife, I knew exactly who she would send. The pieces clicked into place with terrible clarity. You orchestrated everything. I created the circumstances. Her Majesty made the predictable choice. Russell closed the portfolio. She believes she placed a weapon in my household. In reality, I brought her weapon into my confidence. Margaret refused to show weakness. Why? Because I need someone who can move in court circles without suspicion. Russell moved closer. I need you to spy on the woman you serve. The audacity of it stole her breath. You cannot possibly believe I would betray the Crown. I believe you would betray corruption. He returned to his desk and pulled out a red-corded folder. Over the next weeks I will show you proof. The funds she diverted, the people she destroyed, everything. He set the folder on the desk between them. When you've seen the evidence, you'll make a choice. Continue serving a corrupt Crown, or help me bring the truth to light. Margaret stared at the folder. This is treason. This is justice. Russell's voice was quiet but fierce. Someone must hold her accountable. And you appoint yourself judge? I appoint myself witness. He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw genuine emotion, conviction. I don't expect you to trust me. I expect you to be intelligent enough to examine evidence and draw your own conclusions. Margaret's knuckles had gone white. You ask me to betray everything. I ask you to protect the realm from those who claim to serve it while bleeding it dry. He held out the folder. Read it. Verify it. Use your skills to determine whether I'm a madman or telling uncomfortable truths. She didn't take the folder. And if I refuse, if I report everything directly to the Queen, then you'll have made your choice, and I'll have made a catastrophic error in judgment. His expression remained calm. But I don't believe you will. You're too intelligent to dismiss evidence without examining it first. You gamble your life on that belief. I gamble both our lives. Russell set the folder down. If you betray me, I'll be executed for treason. If you help me and we're discovered, you'll meet the same fate. We're bound together now, by marriage, by necessity, and by the choice you'll eventually make. Margaret looked at the folder, at the man who had trapped her so completely, at the impossible situation. I could take it and burn it, tell the Queen everything, have him arrested before nightfall. But doubt crept in. Because Russell Blackwood was right, she was intelligent. Too intelligent not to question. I need time, she said finally. Take what you need. Russell returned to his chair. But understand, the Queen will expect reports. You'll need to send her something that satisfies expectations while revealing nothing of substance. Can you manage that? It was a test, an acknowledgement that she was skilled enough to play both sides. Margaret felt something shift inside her. Not allegiance, not yet, but the beginning of recognition that the world she had believed herself to serve might be more complicated than she had allowed herself to see. I can manage that, she said quietly. Good. Russell began writing again. We dine at 8. It was a dismissal, as if he had not just upended her entire existence. Margaret turned and walked to the door, but as her hand touched the handle, Russell's voice stopped her. Your Grace, she looked back. I didn't choose you because I believed you weak or malleable. I chose you because I need someone strong enough to bear the truth and wise enough to know what to do with it. Everything about this situation is manipulation, Your Grace. Yes, he inclined his head, but sometimes the truth itself is the greatest manipulation of all. The question is whether you have the courage to confront it. Margaret held his gaze for one long moment, then opened the door and walked out. Margaret woke before dawn and made her way to the library. The house was silent at this hour. No servants stirred in the corridors, no sounds of morning preparation disturbed the stillness. Only her footsteps, muffled by carpet, marked her passage through Ashbourne Manor. The library was vast, lined floor to ceiling with books, their leather spines gleaming in the pale light that filtered through tall windows. The smell of old paper and binding glue filled the air, familiar and oddly comforting. Margaret found the third shelf from the window, found the copy of Plutarch's Lives, worn binding, faded gold lettering. Behind it, exactly as promised, was a leather portfolio secured with brass clasps. She carried it to the reading table near the window, set it down, and stood looking at it for a long moment. Once I open this, there is no returning to ignorance. The thought was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Margaret unfastened the clasps and opened the portfolio. The first document was a ledger, not the official Crown accounts that Parliament reviewed each year, but a secondary set of records written in a careful hand she recognised immediately as belonging to the Queen's personal secretary. Her eyes moved down the columns, tracking numbers and notations. Payment to Lord Ashford for services rendered. 5,000 disbursement to Lady Weston for procurement. 3,200 transfer to private account, Kent Estate. 12,000. The amounts were staggering. More than that, they were specific. Dates, recipients, purposes coded in abbreviations that suggested these transactions were meant to remain hidden. The next page showed property acquisitions. Estates purchased through intermediaries, always at prices well below market value, always from families facing financial difficulties or political pressure. Blackwood Estate, purchased via proxy. 8,000 market value, 25,000 Riverside Holdings, acquired through Crown intervention. 6,500 market value, 18,000. She recognized some of the names. Families who had fallen from favor, peers who had opposed the Queen on matters of policy, and then mysteriously found themselves financially ruined. Margaret set down the ledger and picked up the next document, correspondence. Letters dictated in the Queen's private chambers and written by her most trusted secretary, sealed with her personal signet, never meant for eyes beyond their immediate recipients. Lord Hastings has become inconvenient. See that he is reminded of his debt to the Crown and the consequences of ingratitude. The merchant guilds require adjustment in their thinking. Withhold licenses until they understand cooperation is mandatory, not optional. Sir Edwin's daughter would make an excellent match for our purposes. Arrange circumstances that make refusal difficult. Each letter was dated, authenticated by the Queen's personal seal, impressed in wax. Margaret read them with growing numbness. These were not the orders of a monarch maintaining necessary control. These were the machinations of someone who used power as a weapon against anyone who questioned her authority. She continued reading. Financial records showing Crown funds diverted to private accounts. Reports from agents detailing surveillance on loyal subjects whose only crime was wealth or influence the Queen found threatening. Lists of properties seized under false pretenses, families destroyed, reputations dismantled with surgical precision, and woven through it all a pattern. A clear, undeniable pattern of corruption executed over decades with such care and discretion that it had remained invisible to those not looking for it. Margaret sat back as morning light strengthened through the windows, illuminating the documents spread before her. Her first instinct was denial. These could be forgeries, elaborate fabrications designed to turn me against the Crown. But the handwriting was authentic. She had seen the Queen's correspondence enough times to recognize it without question. The seals were genuine, showing the precise imperfections of the Queen's personal signet ring. The financial records matched patterns she herself had noticed, but never questioned during her years of service. How did I not see this? The answer was uncomfortable but clear. She had not looked. Had not allowed herself to question the orders she received, the assignments she carried out, the lives she had quietly helped destroy in service to what she believed was the realm's greater good. Loyalty had made her blind. She spent the next 3 hours cross-referencing dates and names, verifying details against her own memory of events she had witnessed or participated in. Each verification only strengthened the case Russell had assembled. This was not fabrication. This was documentation of systematic corruption spanning decades, and Margaret herself had been one of the instruments of that corruption, never realizing what she served. She didn't hear Russell enter the library. One moment she was alone with the damning evidence, and the next she sensed his presence and looked up to find him standing in the doorway. He wore riding clothes, his hair windswept, his boots marked with mud. He looked more human than she had yet seen him, less like a calculating strategist, and more like a man who had just returned from physical exertion. "How long have you been reading?" he asked quietly. Margaret glanced at the window. The sun was well above the horizon now. 3 hours, perhaps 4. Russell crossed to the table and looked down at the documents. "What do you think?" It was the question she had been dreading, because answering it meant acknowledging what she had discovered, and acknowledgement meant choice. "I think," Margaret's voice was steady despite the turmoil beneath, "I think you have been very thorough in documenting your evidence. What will you do now?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that would determine both their fates. Margaret looked down at the documents, at the irrefutable proof of everything Russell had claimed. Then she looked up at the man who had orchestrated her presence in his home, had married her knowing exactly who and what she was, had gambled both their lives on the belief that she would choose truth over blind loyalty. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. It was the most honest thing she had said to him since their marriage. Russell nodded slowly, as if he had expected this answer. "You are angry." "Yes." "At her? Or at me?" Margaret considered the question carefully. "Both. Her for what she has done, you for forcing me to see it. And you believe exposing this justifies treason. I believe exposing this is loyalty. True loyalty to the realm, not to the woman who has poisoned it." He met her gaze directly, and for the first time, she saw genuine emotion in his eyes, not warmth, but conviction. The Queen is not England. She is one person who has abused her position for personal gain. Removing her corruption does not weaken the crown. It strengthens it. Margaret wanted to argue, to find fault in his logic, to discover some piece of evidence that would prove him wrong and restore her certainty. But she could not. "What exactly do you intend to do with this evidence?" she asked finally. "Present it to Parliament. Force an investigation. Let the truth be examined by those with the authority to act on it." Russell's expression was determined. The Queen has protected herself through fear and discretion. Once her corruption is made public, those protections dissolve. "You are asking me to help you commit treason. I am asking you to help me seek justice." He leaned back. "But I will not force you. The choice is yours, Your Grace. Continue reporting to the Queen and pretend you saw nothing here, or help me bring this evidence to light and accept whatever consequences follow. Those consequences include both our executions if we fail." "Yes." The single word was calm, accepting, certain. Margaret stared at him, trying to understand the kind of man who would risk everything on principle, who would marry a stranger and trust her with his life based on nothing but calculated assessment of her character. "You are either the most courageous person I have ever met," she said slowly, "or the most foolish. Perhaps both." Russell stood. "You have time to decide. The Queen expects weekly reports, which means you have 6 days before you must choose which master to serve." He moved toward the door, then paused and looked back. "For what it matters, Your Grace, I am sorry. Sorry that you were placed in this position. Sorry that I am the one who shattered your certainty. Sorry that duty has proven to be more complicated than you deserved." His voice was quiet but sincere. "But I am not sorry that I chose you. You are exactly as strong as I believed you to be." Then he left, his footsteps fading down the corridor, leaving Margaret alone with evidence that could change everything. 3 weeks passed in a strange balance between two lives. By day, Margaret performed the role of Duchess with precision. She met with tenants, reviewed household accounts, attended a small gathering where she was received with the deference afforded to the Duke's wife. She smiled at appropriate moments, made polite conversation, and presented herself as exactly what society expected. By night, she returned to the library and continued reading. Russell had not exaggerated the extent of his documentation. Beyond the initial portfolio, there were 3 more volumes, each more damning than the last. Letters detailing bribes paid to judges, reports of Crown agents fabricating evidence against innocent men, financial records showing systematic theft from public works, the funds diverted while roads crumbled, and bridges went unrepaired. Margaret verified what she could through her own knowledge and contacts. Every verification confirmed what Russell had claimed. But verification didn't make the choice easier. She found herself standing at her window one evening, staring at her reflection in the darkened glass. 6 years, 6 years of service, 6 years of missions completed without question. The Queen had recruited her when she was broken, a widow with no purpose, drowning in grief after Thomas died. The Crown had given her meaning again. direction, a reason to wake each morning. "You have remarkable skills, Lady Ashford," the Queen had said during that first meeting. "Skills that should not be wasted on mourning. Serve me and you will serve England itself." Margaret had believed it, had been grateful for it. And now Russell was asking her to betray the woman who had saved her from despair. But was it truly betrayal, if that woman was corrupt? Margaret pressed her forehead against the cool glass, feeling the weight of impossible loyalties crushing down on her. She avoided Russell during those weeks, sent polite excuses when dinner invitations came, claimed headaches, fatigue, estate duties, anything to postpone the moment when she would have to look him in the eye and make her choice known. Because part of her, a stubborn, loyal part, still wanted to find a way to serve both truth and duty. Perhaps the evidence is incomplete. Perhaps there's an explanation for the Queen's actions. Perhaps I'm being manipulated by a man who admits to orchestrating my entire life. But every time she returned to the library, every document she examined, every verification she completed, that hope crumbled a little more. The Queen was not misunderstood. She was not acting for the realm's greater good. She was simply corrupt, and Margaret had been her instrument for 6 years. One evening, Margaret found herself in the chapel on the estate grounds, a small stone building she had noticed but never entered. She wasn't particularly religious. Thomas had been quietly, but faith had died with him, buried alongside hope and the future they'd planned. Still, she found herself sitting in a pew, staring at the simple altar, searching for what? Guidance? Absolution? Permission to betray everything she thought she believed in? "I didn't expect to find you here." Margaret didn't turn at the sound of Russell's voice. "I didn't expect to be here." He entered quietly and sat in the pew across the aisle, close enough to speak, far enough to give her space. "You've been avoiding me." "Yes." "Because you've read the evidence and don't know what to do with it." Margaret finally looked at him. "You make it sound simple. As if choosing between treason and complicity is an easy decision." "I never said it was easy." Russell's voice was soft. "Only necessary." "Necessary." Margaret's laugh was bitter. "Do you know what the Queen did for me? When my husband died, I had nothing. No purpose, no future. I was drowning." She paused, feeling the old grief rise. "She gave me a reason to live again. She made me useful. Made me matter." "And you're grateful?" "Yes." Margaret's voice cracked slightly. "I'm grateful. Despite everything, despite the corruption, despite the lies, part of me is still grateful to the woman who pulled me from the darkness." Russell was silent for a long moment. "My father died believing himself a failure," he said finally. "Disgraced, destroyed by fabricated scandal. In his last days he wouldn't see anyone, wouldn't speak. He just faded." Russell's hands tightened on the pew. "And I was grateful too. Grateful that his suffering had finally ended." He turned to look at Margaret directly. "But gratitude to the person who caused that suffering? That's not loyalty, Margaret. That's Stockholm captivity, dressed in noble language." The words hit like a physical blow. "She saved me," Margaret whispered. "She used you, there's a difference." Russell's voice remained gentle despite the harsh truth. "You were vulnerable, grieving, desperate for purpose. She exploited that vulnerability to create a weapon. And now you're struggling because acknowledging her corruption means acknowledging that your entire purpose for 6 years was built on a lie." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "You're asking me to destroy the only thing that's kept me whole." "No, I'm asking you to build something new, something based on truth instead of manipulation." Russell stood and moved closer. "You are not only valuable because of what you can do for others. You have worth independent of service or loyalty or duty. Easy for you to say. You've always had wealth, position, purpose. I've had isolation." Russell's voice hardened. "Wealth means nothing when you watch your father die in disgrace and know you're too powerless to stop it. Position means nothing when every ally is a potential betrayer. I understand what it means to lose everything that defines you." He crouched beside her pew so they were eye level. "The difference is, I chose to rebuild on foundation of truth rather than accepting comfortable lies. I'm asking you to make the same choice. Not because it's easy, not because you owe me anything, but because you deserve better than being someone's grateful weapon." Margaret sat in the chapel long after Russell left, his words echoing in the silence. "You deserve better than being someone's grateful weapon." Did she? 6 years of perfect service. 6 years of unquestioning loyalty. 6 years of believing she was serving something noble. All of it built on the Queen's corruption. Margaret thought of the families she'd helped destroy, the targets she'd investigated who, she now realized, were probably innocent of everything except inconveniencing the Queen's interests. The mission she'd completed without question because she believed, truly believed, she was protecting England. How many innocent people had suffered because of her blind loyalty? The guilt was crushing. But beneath the guilt was something else, something fragile and new. Anger, not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, determined fury of someone who'd been used, manipulated, made into an instrument of destruction, and convinced it was righteousness. The Queen had saved her, yes, but Russell was right. She'd also used her, and gratitude didn't erase that truth. She found Russell in the stables the next afternoon, examining a mare that had gone lame. Russell. He looked up, and something in her expression made him carefully release the mare's leg and straighten. What happened? Margaret pulled out the scrap of the Queen's latest message, the one demanding she steal his documents. She has given me an order. I am to obtain your private correspondence and deliver it to her agent by week's end. Russell took the fragment and examined it without visible emotion. I see. What will you do? Margaret took a breath, steadying herself. I spent all night in that chapel, thinking about loyalty, about gratitude, about what I owe the Queen for giving me purpose when I had none. She met his gaze directly, and I realized something. The Queen didn't give me purpose. She gave me her purpose and convinced me it was mine. There's a difference. Russell remained silent, waiting. I'm angry, Margaret continued, voice steady despite the emotion beneath. Angry at her for using my grief as a weapon. Angry at myself for being so desperate for meaning that I never questioned what I was serving. But most of all, I'm angry that choosing truth means betraying the person who saved me from despair. She stepped closer. But gratitude doesn't erase corruption. And loyalty without principle isn't virtue, it's complicity. Margaret's voice strengthened. So I will tell you what she wants, and we will decide together how to use her expectations against her. You understand what you're committing to? Yes. Margaret felt something settle into place inside her. Not peace exactly, but resolution, born of conscious choice rather than blind obedience. I'm committing treason against a corrupt crown in service to truth. I'm choosing to become someone I can respect, rather than remaining someone who follows orders without question. She held his gaze. I'm not doing this because I trust you completely. I'm doing this because I trust the evidence. Because I trust my own judgment more than I trust the woman who taught me never to use it. Russell studied her face for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition. Respect. Perhaps even the beginning of genuine partnership. Your husband, he said quietly. Thomas. What would he think of this choice? Margaret felt tears prick her eyes, but this time she let one fall. He would tell me that honor means doing what's right, even when it costs everything. Her voice broke slightly. He would be proud that I finally remembered that. Russell nodded slowly. Then we proceed together. The summons arrived 2 weeks before their planned revelation. Margaret was in her sitting room when Mrs. Pemberton brought the sealed envelope, her expression carefully neutral. This arrived by special courier, Your Grace. The messenger said it required immediate attention. Margaret took the envelope, noting the heavy wax seal. Thank you, Mrs. Pemberton. The housekeeper withdrew, and Margaret broke the seal with steady hands. Lady Ashbourne, your presence is required in London. You will attend me at Kensington Palace tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock. Come alone. Tell the Duke you are visiting family. This is not a request. Chum Margaret read the message twice, then burned it in the fireplace. She suspects something. Perhaps not the full extent, but enough to demand personal verification of my loyalty. She found Russell in his study. The Queen has summoned me to London, Margaret said without preamble. Tomorrow afternoon she specifically ordered me to come alone. Russell set down his pen, his expression going cold and focused. 2 weeks before our planned revelation. That cannot be coincidence. No, she suspects something is wrong. What will you do? Margaret moved to the window, looking out at the grounds she had come to think of as home. I will go. If I refuse, she'll know I've been compromised and move against us immediately. And if she has discovered your true allegiance, Russell stood. You could be walking into your own arrest. Then you proceed without me. Margaret turned to face him. You have enough allies positioned. Lord Pembroke knows the timeline. The evidence is secured. That is not acceptable. It may be necessary. She crossed to him, holding his gaze. We knew this risk existed. That one or both of us might not survive to see the truth revealed. Russell's jaw tightened. I will not simply allow you to walk into danger without... You have no choice. Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. We are committed now. The Queen expects me tomorrow at 3. If I fail to appear, she will know something is catastrophically wrong. Our only chance is for me to attend, assess the situation, and respond accordingly. Margaret arrived at Kensington Palace at precisely 3 o'clock the next afternoon. She was immediately escorted to the Queen's private chambers, the same room where this entire affair had begun months ago. The Queen sat behind her writing desk, positioned so afternoon light cast her face in sharp relief. She did not rise as Margaret entered, did not smile or offer greeting. She simply watched with dark, penetrating eyes as Margaret curtsied and waited. Lady Ashbourne, the Queen said finally, her voice soft and deadly, we have much to discuss. Margaret remained in her curtsy, head bowed, waiting for permission to rise. The Queen let the silence stretch, a tactic Margaret recognized. Silence created discomfort, and discomfort made people reveal themselves. Margaret remained perfectly still. You may rise. Margaret straightened, folding her hands at her waist, her expression composed and attentive. Every muscle controlled, every breath measured. You have been at Ashbourne Manor for nearly 3 months, the Queen said, her tone conversational, but her eyes sharp as flint. Tell me what you have learned about your husband. It was both question and test. Margaret had prepared for this during the entire journey to London. The Duke is cautious and methodical, Your Majesty. He maintains strict privacy regarding his political activities and shares very little with household staff or with me. She paused, allowing concern to colour her voice. I have gained access to certain documents, as you know, but his inner circle remains closed to me. He trusts me as a wife in name, but not yet as a confidant. Yet. The Queen's eyes narrowed fractionally. You believe you can gain deeper access. With time, yes, but it will require patience and careful cultivation. Any sudden push for information would alert his suspicions. It was exactly what an agent in Margaret's position would say, honest about limitations while suggesting eventual success. The Queen rose and moved to the window, her movements elegant and controlled. I have received concerning reports, she said, still facing the window. Nothing concrete, only whispers, suggestions that the Duke may have discovered your true purpose. Margaret's pulse quickened, but her expression remained neutral. Has Your Majesty received evidence of such discovery? No, which is precisely what concerns me. The Queen turned. Russell Blackwood is too intelligent not to investigate his wife, too careful not to verify her background. Yet he appears to have accepted you without question. It was a trap disguised as reasoning, testing whether Margaret would defend Russell. Perhaps he believes himself too powerful to be threatened by court intrigue, Margaret offered carefully. Men of his wealth often develop arrogance that blinds them to subtler dangers. Perhaps, the Queen's tone suggested she didn't believe this. Or perhaps he knows exactly who you are and has chosen to feed you false information while conducting his actual activities beyond your observation. Margaret allowed a flicker of concern to cross her face, the reaction of an agent worried she might have been deceived. If Your Majesty believes I have been compromised, I believe you have delivered precisely what he wanted you to deliver. The Queen moved closer. Those documents you provided, they showed him as ambitious but not dangerous, active but not imminently threatening, exactly the assessment that would make me lower my guard. She is too intelligent. She has seen through part of our deception. Your Majesty, I assure you, assurances are insufficient. The Queen cut her off with a gesture. I require proof of your continued loyalty. Margaret felt ice settle in her stomach, but kept her voice steady. What would Your Majesty have me do? The Queen studied her face with the intensity of someone examining a specimen. I want you to make a choice that reveals your true allegiance. She returned to her desk and retrieved a sealed document. Within this envelope are orders, specific instructions that will test whether you serve the crown or have been turned by your husband's rhetoric. The Queen held it out. You will return to Ashbourne Manor. You will open this envelope in private, and you will carry out the orders within 3 days. Margaret took the envelope, feeling its weight. If you complete the task, the Queen continued, you will have proven your loyalty beyond question. If you refuse or if you warn the Duke, I will know you have betrayed the crown, and the consequences will be absolute. I understand, Your Majesty. Do you? The Queen's voice dropped. Do you truly understand what I am asking? Not for obedience, Margaret, for proof. Proof that your loyalty remains absolute despite months in close proximity to a charismatic man who likely appeals to your sense of justice. She knows. Not everything, but enough. Margaret met the Queen's gaze directly, allowing vulnerability to show. Your Majesty, I will not claim the assignment is easy. The Duke has been courteous. Working alongside him has required me to see him as human, rather than merely a target. But my loyalty has never wavered. The Queen studied her for a long moment. 3 days, she repeated. 3 days from your return to Ashbourne Manor, or I will know you chose him over duty, and the consequences will be absolute. Yes, Your Majesty. Margaret curtsied deeply, clutching the envelope. You may go. The Queen returned to her desk. And Margaret? Margaret paused at the door. Do not disappoint me. I have invested considerable time in your training. It would be unfortunate if that investment proved misplaced. The threat was clear and unmistakable. Margaret did not return directly to Ashbourne Manor. Instead, she went to a small townhouse in an unfashionable part of London. A safe house she had used during previous assignments, accessible without arousing suspicion. Inside, she locked the door and broke the seal on the Queen's envelope with trembling hands. The orders were written in the Queen's own hand, brief and devastating. You will obtain access to the Duke's private correspondence regarding his parliamentary allies. You will deliver copies to my agent by week's end. And you will ensure the Duke remains unaware of the breach. This is your final test of loyalty. Fail, and I will assume you have been turned. Margaret read it twice, then held it over a candle flame and watched it burn. She wants me to betray Russell's network, to hand her everything she needs to destroy our allies before we can reveal her corruption. It was brilliant in its simplicity. If Margaret complied, the Queen would dismantle their entire operation before the parliamentary revelation could occur. If Margaret refused, the Queen would know she had been compromised. There was only one possible response. Margaret pulled out paper and pen and began writing detailed instructions for their allies. Contingency plans if she and Russell were arrested, methods for distributing the evidence even without their direct involvement, names of trusted individuals who could continue the work if they failed. Then she burned her notes, memorized everything, and prepared to return to Ashbourne Manor. 3 days, the Queen had said. 3 days to prove loyalty or reveal betrayal. Margaret had already made her choice. Now she just had to survive the consequences. Margaret returned to Ashbourne Manor as dusk settled over the estate. She went directly to Russell's study, not bothering with pretense or delay. He looked up from his desk as she entered, and whatever he saw in her expression made him rise immediately. What happened? Margaret closed the door and locked it. Then she crossed to his desk and placed both hands flat on the polished wood, steadying herself. The Queen knows something is wrong. She didn't confront me directly, but she suspects I've been compromised. Russell's expression went cold and focused. How certain are you? Completely. She gave me orders. A final test of loyalty. Margaret's voice remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. I'm to obtain your private correspondence regarding parliamentary allies and deliver copies to her agent within 3 days, which would give her everything she needs to dismantle our network before we can act. Yes. Russell was silent for a moment, his mind clearly racing through implications and countermeasures. What did you tell her? That I would comply. Margaret met his gaze. And then I came directly here to tell you, which means we have 72 hours before she realizes I've betrayed her orders. 72 hours. Russell moved to the window, looking out at the darkening grounds. Not enough time to execute our original plan. We would need at least 2 weeks to coordinate properly. Then we accelerate. Margaret's voice was firm. We move now, with whatever preparation we have. Russell turned sharply. That significantly increases our risk of failure. Remaining passive guarantees failure. If we do nothing, she dismantles our allies and arrests us both before the month is out. Margaret crossed to stand beside him. We always knew this might come down to imperfect timing. The question is whether we have enough position to succeed despite the compressed timeline. Russell studied her face in the gathering darkness. You understand what you're proposing. We would be committing fully with no retreat possible. I committed fully the moment I chose to warn you instead of following her orders. Margaret's voice softened slightly. There is no retreat. There never was. A long silence stretched between them as Russell calculated probabilities and outcomes with that precise mind that had orchestrated this entire conspiracy. Lord Pembroke can be ready within 48 hours, he said finally. He has copies of the core evidence secured in 3 separate locations. If we signal him tomorrow, he can begin distribution to key parliamentary members before the Queen realizes what's happening. What about Lady Ashford? She controls access to the court records. She'll need 24 hours notice minimum. Russell pulled out paper and began writing rapidly. But yes, she can be ready. The question is whether we can coordinate simultaneous revelation across enough channels that the Queen cannot suppress it before it gains momentum. Margaret watched him work, his movements precise and efficient. You've been planning for this contingency. I plan for all contingencies. Russell didn't look up from his writing, including the possibility that events would force our hand before we were fully prepared. He finished writing and sealed 3 separate letters with wax, then looked up at Margaret. These go to Pembroke, Ashford and Lord Westfield. They contain orders to execute our revelation in 48 hours. Simultaneous presentation of evidence to Parliament, distribution of copies to newspaper editors, and public posting of key documents where they cannot be easily suppressed. That fast? Margaret felt her pulse quicken. Russell, that gives them almost no time to prepare. It gives the Queen almost no time to respond. His expression was grim, but determined. Speed is now our greatest weapon. If we move quickly enough, she won't be able to organize an effective counterattack before the evidence is public. Margaret absorbed this, running through scenarios. She'll still try to arrest us. Undoubtedly, which is why we won't be here when her agents arrive. Russell gestured to the letters. These get delivered tonight by separate couriers. Tomorrow morning you and I depart for London under the pretense of attending a social function. If she already suspects, we must assume we are being observed, which makes visible normalcy our strongest protection. We'll be visible, establish our presence at multiple locations, and create alibis that make it difficult for her to move against us without attracting attention. And then we wait. Russell's voice was quiet but edged with steel. In 48 hours, evidence of systematic Crown corruption will be presented to Parliament, distributed to every major newspaper in London, and posted in public squares across the city. Once it's public, the Queen's ability to suppress it through intimidation becomes significantly limited. Margaret nodded slowly, understanding the strategy. We're betting everything on transparency. That public revelation will protect us through sheer visibility. Yes, it's imperfect, but it's the best option we have given the compressed timeline. Russell met her gaze directly. Are you certain about this? Once these letters are sent, there is no recalling them. We will have committed to full revelation regardless of personal consequences. Margaret thought of the documents she had read. The families destroyed, the corruption documented, the systematic abuse of power spanning decades. She thought of her own 6 years serving that corruption unknowingly, carrying out orders without questioning their true purpose. I'm certain, she said quietly. Send the letters. They worked through the night, preparing contingencies and backup plans. Russell had been thorough in his preparations, copies of evidence secured in multiple locations, trusted allies positioned strategically, channels for distribution that didn't depend on any single point of failure. But acceleration changed everything. Plans that had been refined over months were now being executed in days. What about the Queen's agent? Margaret asked, as dawnlight began creeping through the windows. The one I'm supposed to deliver your correspondence to. When I fail to appear, she'll know immediately. Let her know. Russell sealed another set of letters. By the time her report reaches the Queen, our revelation will already be in motion. The delay between your missed meeting and her response gives us hours of additional preparation. She might send agents directly here. She might, but we won't be here to receive them. Russell glanced at the clock. We depart for London in 3 hours. I've already sent word ahead that we'll be staying at the townhouse for a series of social engagements. Perfectly normal behavior for a Duke and Duchess. Margaret felt the pieces clicking into place. The cover story, the visible presence in London, the alibi that made them public figures rather than fugitives. It was elegant in its simplicity. You're good at this, she observed. Russell looked up, something almost like amusement flickering across his exhausted face. I had an excellent teacher. My father was a master strategist before the Queen destroyed him. He taught me to think several moves ahead, to prepare for contingencies, to never commit to action without ensuring multiple paths to success. He would be proud of you. Perhaps. Russell's expression sobered. Or perhaps he would think me reckless for risking everything on principle. I'll never know. The moment of vulnerability passed quickly, as Russell returned to his preparations, but Margaret filed it away, another piece of the complex man she had allied herself with. They departed Ashbourne Manor at mid-morning, travelling in Russell's coach with minimal luggage and no fanfare. To any observer, it was simply the Duke and Duchess heading to London for routine social obligations. Inside the coach, they reviewed final details in low voices. "Pembroke will move first," Russell said, checking his notes. "Tomorrow evening, he presents the financial documentation to 3 key parliamentary members simultaneously. Men who cannot be easily intimidated and who have the political capital to demand formal investigation. Lady Ashford delivers copies to the newspaper editors at dawn the following morning. By the time the Queen realises what's happening, preliminary articles will already be in print. And Westfield handles public distribution at market squares across London simultaneously. Broadsides detailing the core accusations with instructions on where to view the full evidence." Russell looked out the window at the passing countryside. Once it's public, truly public, not just whispered rumours, the Queen's options become limited. She can arrest us, certainly, but she cannot arrest everyone who has seen the evidence. Margaret absorbed this, feeling the weight of what they were setting in motion. Hundreds of people will be implicated, peers, officials, agents who carried out her orders. Yes, many of them unknowingly, like you. Russell's voice softened. The goal is not mass punishment, it's accountability at the top. Removal of the source of corruption. You sound very certain that will be the outcome. I'm not certain of anything except that inaction guarantees continued corruption. He turned from the window to face her. We may fail, we may be arrested, tried and executed for treason, but at least the truth will exist in the world. At least people will know what was done in the Crown's name. Margaret understood that conviction, the willingness to sacrifice everything for a principle. She had thought she possessed it once, in service to what she believed was righteous duty. Now she was discovering it again, in service to truth. They arrived in London as evening fell, going directly to Russell's townhouse in Mayfair. It was smaller than Ashbourne Manor but elegant, positioned on a street where comings and goings would be noticed and remembered. Perfect for establishing visible presence. That evening, they attended a dinner hosted by Lord Pembroke. The gathering was small but influential, peers and their wives, political allies and neutral parties, all carefully selected. Margaret played her role flawlessly, the attentive Duchess, gracious and composed, giving no indication that within 24 hours she and her husband would be branded traitors. She watched Russell move through the room with practiced ease, conversing about trade policy and estate management, projecting calm authority. No one looking at him would suspect he had just set in motion the most audacious political revelation in decades. As the evening concluded and they prepared to depart, Lord Pembroke caught Margaret's eye across the room. He nodded once, a subtle gesture that conveyed understanding and solidarity. Tomorrow evening. He moves tomorrow evening. Margaret returned the nod and followed Russell to their carriage. That night in the townhouse, Margaret stood at the window of her temporary chambers and looked out at London spread below, thousands of lights marking homes and lives that would be affected by what was coming. A knock sounded at her door. "Come in." Russell entered, still dressed though it was well past midnight. He carried a sealed letter. "This just arrived by courier, from the Queen's agent." He handed it to Margaret. "It's addressed to you." Margaret broke the seal and read, "Lady Ashbourne, you were to meet my agent 2 days hence. You have not confirmed receipt of orders or indicated compliance. Her Majesty grows concerned about your silence. Send word immediately, or we will be forced to assume the worst." Margaret handed the letter to Russell. "She's giving me one final chance to comply. What will you do?" Margaret moved to the fireplace and held the letter over the flames, watching it catch and burn. "I've already made my choice," she said quietly. "Tomorrow, when Pembroke presents the evidence, the Queen will know exactly where my loyalty lies." Russell watched the letter burn to ash, then nodded. "Then we see this through to the end." The day of revelation dawned cold and clear. Margaret woke before sunrise, dressed with meticulous care, and joined Russell in the townhouse dining room. Neither of them had much appetite, but they went through the motions of breakfast, maintaining the appearance of normalcy, even though they both knew what was coming. "Pembroke moves at 3 o'clock this afternoon," Russell said quietly, setting down his coffee cup. "He'll present the financial documentation to Lords Halifax, Thornton and Pemberton simultaneously in separate meetings." "Why separate?" "So the Queen cannot silence all 3 at once. By the time she learns of one presentation, the other 2 will have already occurred." Russell's voice was calm, but Margaret could see the tension in his shoulders. Lady Ashford distributes to the newspaper editors at dawn tomorrow. Westfield posts the broadsides at first light. Margaret absorbed the timeline. 24 hours from now, all of London will know. Yes, and the Queen will know we betrayed her. She likely already suspects. Russell met her gaze. Your failure to deliver my correspondence, your silence in response to her agent's inquiries, she's not stupid. She knows something has gone wrong. Then why hasn't she moved against us? Because she doesn't yet have proof of betrayal, only suspicion. And arresting a Duke and Duchess without clear evidence would create exactly the kind of public spectacle she wants to avoid. Russell leaned back. But once the evidence becomes public, proof of our involvement will be obvious. She'll have no choice but to act. Margaret felt the weight of inevitability settling over them. We should prepare for arrest. Already done. I've arranged legal counsel, solicitors who will demand public trial rather than quiet imprisonment. The more visible our case becomes, the harder it will be for her to simply make us disappear. You're assuming she'll follow legal procedure. I'm assuming she'll calculate that martyring us publicly would be worse than prosecuting us properly. Russell's expression was grim. But you're right, there are no guarantees, which is why I've also arranged for alternative outcomes. Alternative outcomes? Russell pulled a sealed letter from his jacket and placed it on the table between them. If we are arrested, this goes to Lord Pembroke. It contains instructions for continuing the revelation even without our direct involvement, along with documentation of our marriage, the circumstances that brought you to Ashbourne Manor, and your decision to choose truth over orders. Margaret stared at the letter. You're protecting my reputation. I'm ensuring the truth is known. Russell's voice softened almost imperceptibly. If we fail, if the worst happens, people should understand that you were not a traitor seeking personal gain. You were an agent who discovered corruption and chose conscience over blind loyalty. The gesture touched something deep inside Margaret, recognition that Russell had thought beyond strategy and survival to legacy and truth. Thank you, she said quietly. Russell inclined his head, accepting her gratitude. We should leave soon. I've arranged for us to be visible at several locations throughout the day. The more witnesses who can place us conducting normal activities, the harder it becomes for the Queen to claim we were conspiring in secret. Where are we going? Bond Street for shopping. A gallery viewing at 2 o'clock. Tea at Lady Westfield's at 4. Russell stood. By evening, half of London society will have seen us. When the revelation begins, no one will be able to claim we were in hiding. Margaret understood the strategy. Visibility as armor, witnesses as protection. It was brilliant in its simplicity. They spent the day moving through London's fashionable districts, being seen and remembered. Margaret purchased gloves at a boutique, admired paintings at a gallery, made polite conversation over tea with ladies who would remember every detail of her composure and elegance. All the while, her mind tracked the timeline. 3 o'clock. Pembroke presents the evidence to Halifax. 3:15. Thornton receives his copy. 3:30. Pemberton examines the financial records. By the time they left Lady Westfield's at 5 o'clock, the revelation had already begun. 3 powerful lords were reviewing irrefutable evidence of Crown corruption, and nothing could stop what happened next. They returned to the townhouse as dusk fell. Russell immediately went to his study to check for messages, while Margaret changed from her tea dress into something more practical. She had just finished when Russell appeared at her door, his expression carefully controlled, but something sharp in his eyes. Pembroke succeeded. All 3 lords have confirmed receipt and verified authenticity of the core documents. He paused. Halifax has called for an emergency parliamentary inquiry. It's happening. Margaret felt something release in her chest. Not quite relief, but acknowledgement that they had crossed a point of no return. How long before the Queen learns? She may already know. Halifax's call for inquiry would have been reported immediately. Russell moved into the room. We should expect visitors before morning. Crown agents. Almost certainly. The question is whether they come to arrest us or simply to intimidate us into silence. Margaret crossed to the window, looking out at the darkening street below. We won't be silenced. No, but we should be prepared for what comes next. Russell joined her at the window. Arrest, imprisonment, trial. Possibly for months before resolution. It won't be pleasant. I know. They stood in silence, watching as lamps were lit throughout the city, thousands of points of light marking lives that would soon be touched by what they had set in motion. Do you regret it? Russell asked quietly. Your choice to betray the Queen's orders. Margaret considered the question carefully. No, I regret the years I served her unknowingly. I regret the damage I did while believing I served a righteous cause, but choosing truth over those orders? She turned to face him. That I don't regret. Russell studied her face in the dim light. You've sacrificed everything. Your career, your safety, possibly your life. I've gained something more valuable than safety. Margaret's voice was steady. I've gained the ability to look at myself honestly, to know that when confronted with truth, I chose correctly. Something shifted in Russell's expression, not warmth exactly, but recognition and respect. I chose well when I orchestrated your presence in my household, he said quietly. You are precisely as strong as I believed you would be. We both gambled. Margaret allowed herself a small smile. You gambled that I would choose truth. I gambled that your truth was genuine. Apparently, we were both correct. The knock came at 2 o'clock in the morning. Margaret was awake, dressed, and waiting in the drawing room when she heard it. 3 sharp raps on the front door, authoritative and unmistakable. Russell appeared from his study moments later, equally prepared. Ready? He asked. Margaret nodded. Ready. Russell opened the door himself, not bothering to wake the servants. 6 men stood on the doorstep, dressed in the dark uniforms of Crown agents. Their leader, a stern-faced man Margaret recognized from court, stepped forward. Russell Blackwood, Duke of Ashbourne, and Margaret Blackwood, Duchess of Ashbourne, you are under arrest by order of Her Majesty for conspiracy against the Crown, distribution of slanderous materials, and high treason. Russell's voice was calm and clear. On what evidence? Evidence will be presented at your trial. The agent gestured to his men. You will come with us immediately. We will come willingly, Russell said, provided you allow us to summon our legal counsel and conduct this arrest in accordance with proper procedure. The agent's jaw tightened. You are not in a position to dictate terms. I am a peer of the realm being arrested on charges of treason. I am entitled to legal representation and public trial. Russell's tone remained calm, but carried absolute authority. You may arrest us immediately, but if you do so without allowing us to contact counsel, I will ensure every newspaper in London knows the Crown denied due process to a duke. The threat was clear. Public spectacle was exactly what the Queen wanted to avoid. The agent considered this, then nodded curtly. You have 1 hour to arrange counsel. Then we depart. Acceptable. By late morning, after formal charges were recorded and counsel was summoned, they were confined within the Tower of London. Not in the dungeons, Russell's rank afforded them better accommodations, but imprisoned nonetheless. Separate cells in a secured wing, with guards posted and all communication monitored. Margaret sat on the narrow bed in her cell and allowed herself one moment of fear. Not for herself, but for the possibility that their gamble would fail. That the Queen would suppress the evidence before it gained momentum. That they would simply disappear into Crown custody and be forgotten. Then she pushed the fear aside and focused on what she could control, maintaining her composure, preparing her testimony, ensuring that when the trial came she would speak truth clearly and without wavering. The newspapers arrived at midday, smuggled in by a sympathetic guard. Margaret read the headlines with mounting relief. Crown corruption alleged. Lords call for inquiry. Financial records reveal decades of theft. Duke of Ashbourne arrested following explosive revelations. The articles detailed everything. The evidence Pembroke had presented, the parliamentary inquiry Halifax demanded, the public broadsides Westfield had distributed. Within hours, all of London was reading about systematic Crown corruption, property seizures, fabricated scandals, and the Queen's personal enrichment. It was public. Truly, undeniably public. The Queen could still prosecute them, could still see them executed for treason. But she could no longer suppress the truth. Russell was allowed to visit her cell that evening, under guard supervision. He looked tired but composed, his expression giving nothing away to their observers. "Have you seen the newspapers?" Margaret asked quietly. "Yes, Pembroke succeeded beyond our best expectations." Russell's voice was carefully neutral for the guard's benefit. "The evidence is being examined by parliamentary committee. They cannot ignore it now. What happens next? Trial. Probably within the month." His eyes met hers, conveying what he couldn't say aloud. "We survive until then, and trust that public scrutiny protects us." Margaret understood. As long as their case remained visible, as long as people were watching, the Queen's ability to simply eliminate them was limited. They had traded safety for truth, and gambled that truth would protect them. Now they would discover if that gamble had been wise.
I wasn't looking for redemption. I wasn't searching for a sign. I had my reasons lined in silence, like soldiers standing in a line. You walked in with steady courage, like you'd already made your choice. Not asking for permission, not afraid to use your voice. I told myself it's only strategy, a move we both agreed. But something in the way you stayed was more than what we need. We were never meant for love. We were meant to survive. Two guarded hearts in shadow, learning how to feel alive. Somewhere in the quiet, where the truth can't hide, you became the only thing I never tried to find. And if this world should turn on us, if every door should close, I'd still stand beside you. That's the only thing I know. You saw the cracks beneath me, the parts I never showed. You stood there in the silence and refused to let me go. This wasn't written in the contract, it wasn't part of the plan. But every time you look at me, I'm less than what I am. I've built my life on certainty, on lines that don't erase. But love is something different, it doesn't move in straight lines of grace. We were never meant for love, but it found us anyway. In the space between the battle and the words we couldn't say. Somewhere in the quiet, when the world grew cold, you became the only truth worth more than power or gold. If they call it reckless, if they call it wrong, let them write their stories, we'll just carry on. I was never scared of falling, I was scared of standing still. But loving you is something I finally feel. We were never meant for love, still we chose to stay. In the fire of the moment, we found another way. No crowns, no silent bargains, no walls left to defend. If this is how it ends, let it end with your hand in mine. We were never meant for love, but maybe love was meant for us.